All right, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you had a wonderful day. It was truly wild in the markets today, and it wasn't just about NVDA. It wasn't about the data. It was about Canada and the rate hikes, and now the potential global rate cut shift that is happening. So we got a lot to talk about. We have a big event with the ECB tomorrow, and after the reaction today, I'm going to keep it very simple for you. You could look at the market. You could try to blame the data for why we went up, but I'm telling you, even the data was confusing. You could look around. It was China. It was AI. It was this, NVIDIA. No, this was all the Bank of Canada deciding to cut rates. And if you don't recall, it was around like last meeting or two Bank of Canada meetings ago, people thought they were going to cut, and then they said, nah, we're not going to do it. And now this time they decided to cut, and now that is one more developed nation to add to the list alongside Switzerland and Sweden that have now cut rates. So you could even throw in Brazil, but this is that big shift that is happening. There is a lot of implications in what it leads to. That's what we're going to cover here on the keys, but now also what we deal with tomorrow with the ECB, even leading into the non-farms. This is going to lay the groundwork. So I have all of that, a little mini recap, a little bit of analysis. I have the plays for tomorrow, the questions, and then we're going to end with a lesson. So Chad, what I need from you, a thumbs up on the video. Make sure you're subscribed. And if you don't know, we are live Monday through Friday, 30 minutes before open, youtube.com/the stock market. We will see you there in the morning. Run it, baby.
Working to the couch, it's the 2020 last. Live in the hills, but still get a spread. Started with a live, but still reinvest it. Feel how I feel, then you feel like a blessing. I just want the lesson, I just want protection. I'm up and I'm down, but the sound like progression. Farmer never plans if he waits for perfection. Finger to the down, hold it.
Right off the bat, we're not going to look at the charts in the market as much, and I really want you guys to understand what is happening now. We talked about it a little bit on yesterday's watch list, but now the ball is rolling, and then tomorrow with the ECB, it's about to confirm a couple of things. So here's the first thing, beyond what I just said to you about why it is important to watch these developing countries start to cut, that is getting this whole rate cut shift started once everybody else starts doing it. Think about when the United States started raising rates and then everybody else started following along. Well, we're probably going to be the last one here. But the other fun fact I will give you, Bank of Canada, their last rate hike was about 8 months ago, meaning they started cutting about 8 months after their last hike. Think about where we are at today. We are way longer than 8 months so far. And then even with the ECB, I don't even think they've cut rates since like 2016 or 2017, I believe. Well, they also had their last rate cut about 6 to 8 months ago. So to see some of these countries start shifting to rate cuts, you should be asking yourself a couple of questions. Not even that. Just think about everybody has talked about buy the first hike, sell the first cut, and talking about the U.S. Well, all of these other people moving, that is starting to give you clues. Now, getting into the keys, the big macro shift is in response or in relation to these rates coming down. Everybody was talking about rates coming down, but now if all these other countries and central banks start doing it, the tide is actually turning, and then you are actually seeing it. But now, given how long it was since their last cut, where they're at, where America's at, all of that good stuff, there are two big implications at hand. One, if all of these developed nations start moving, everybody is about to start cutting really soon. That is one observation or conclusion you can draw. Maybe it's just a hypothesis until we find out if it gets confirmed. So that's the first big one, and I think the obvious one. But now this second one, this is where it gets weird, and people are already talking about this, because if you start watching these central banks start to cut after only waiting a couple months from their last hike, and then with all of the inflation around the world, we are not back to 2%. Canada is at like 2.8. I think the ECB is a little bit higher than that. You are still getting sticky inflation. Even in the United States, we can't really seem to get below that 3% on core. Well, if that's the case and inflation is still low, but not low enough in these countries to reach their targets, the fact they're all moving, and then if it eventually one domino leads to the States, does that mean that the inflation targets are going to start being raised? And that way, well, yeah, we cut rates because now we raised the target to 3. Now, Powell and the Fed have said no way in hell that's going to happen. So maybe we could leave on the first one here and we could follow along. And then the second one, it's either they're raising the target or the data, the jobs, and a lot of things might start really slowing down. But you got to be patient because maybe that just happens all after the election. Remember, you could still have an election and then there will be Powell and then still about a month and a half till the end of the year for them to meet their targets and all of that as outlined in the SCP. So hopefully this helps, but this is absolutely huge. I think it caused a big reaction today, and you'll probably notice we were talking about it. It's like, yo, rate cut odds are coming down all of a sudden or higher, and everyone's pricing in more cuts after not doing that. You go read financial media, they're like, stocks go up as rate cut odds in NVDA. Well, think about it. It's all of these weird bond moves, but this is the answer. You are watching developing countries now start to shift into rate cuts. So that's the first big key. The next big thing now is the ECB tomorrow. This should play out exactly the same as today. If they get a rate cut, I'm sure there will be a knee-jerk reaction like we saw with Bank of Canada today for a little bit, and then everybody will start responding to that because if they do in fact cut, that will be another big shift. And now you add the biggest European force. That includes Germany, ECB, Germany. That's all included. If they start cutting rates, man, that is showing you where the puck is going. Oh, my gosh, Canada, Wayne Gretzky. Oh, the point is they might not do it tomorrow. And this is where I want to bring up one interesting fact about it is that right now it is priced in that they are more likely to do so than not. So usually they follow the probabilities, but that's really only in America because last time, if you remember, it was like a meeting or two ago, Bank of Canada, everybody thought they were going to cut at one of the prior meetings, and they came out and said, nah, we're not cutting. We just going to hold. So this could be the setup for tomorrow. If they do cut, though, and the ECB does decide to make that, that will start to be even harder to ignore. Yeah, the markets might react for a little bit, and markets may be detached from this, but the point is, once we start seeing all of this occur, we will be able to confirm whether or not we're really getting cuts, targets, or anything else is moving. So watch out for the ECB tomorrow. That will be before the bell, so you don't have to wait too long. And then finally, here's the deal with everything, man. With all of this, the non-farms does not matter anymore. Yeah, I know it's on Friday, and like unless there's a huge revision and that's the shock that shows up, I just think it's a matter of the range of the market and the levels up until we get Powell the week after, especially if the ECB cuts tomorrow. So what I'm saying is that the non-farms on Friday, yeah, it's going to be a big event. But at this point, yeah, maybe the SPY goes up another 100 points, goes down, it holds the previous range, goes higher. But I don't think that data is going to give you the punch you're looking for, especially if we get another big central bank move tomorrow out of the ECB. And then Powell is going to be the cherry on top the week after with a SEP. So at this point, I mean, the market may do its thing. Maybe there is a little bit of dislocation, but I do think the answer lies in the macro and the central bank. So hopefully that helps. Hopefully we see you tomorrow. But now let us get into the plays. So right off the bat, I got a couple of simple plays in the first one. This was the one I was raving about yesterday, even with the title of the video. We were talking about Bank of Canada. If another central bank moves, well, gold played out. It happened. So right when I got that news, gold had the knee-jerk pop and then drop. I bought it on the drop. It didn't give up all of the pre-market gains. It was already up there pre-market, but was able to ride it out. I'm holding one MGC. I put GC, but I went with the micro. And then depending on what happens with the ECB, I will be down to add to that play and ride it out. And essentially, I plan on holding gold until we hit another wall at one of the highs or until gold and some of the other broader factors stop responding to these central bank shifts. So keep your eyes out for that play. I think it's going to be very pivotal for tomorrow with the ECB. Then play number 2. I almost made a play on this one today, Pfizer, and they're at that breakout level of like 29.30, and they had news today, and this is why I'm saying this, because they had news about the approval of like a new vax or something like that, and it got them going up, and then it chilled out. But the way I'm looking at Pfizer, if you get any news at this $30 level, like news where you get one of those huge green shoots and people start reacting, that's what it will need to go crazy, and that's what will turn those options that are cheap and barely move into big movers. News at the breakout point past the 30, that will get some people excited here. So I'm going to be watching out for that. No play except for the long term as of now. And then finally, I'm probably way early with this, but I just want you to, I'm trying to shape kind of the picture here so you could keep looking ahead and don't get too distracted. But Netflix and JPM, these guys are the ones that report early in the earnings season. And yeah, it may be early now, but by the time we're done with Powell, you're probably going to be getting the buyback blackout period. And then a couple weeks after that, before you know it, you will be getting the next round of earnings, believe it or not. So I think summer is going to be a doozy in terms of volatility going back and forth, or just low volume, just culminating in one giant move up or down. But you do got to keep these earnings in mind, and that's something I'd be looking for. So watch out for these plays, because both financials and even like Netflix and some other tech like that, they have been making moves, especially after today. So those are the main plays. As far as everything else, here are the plays that I made today. I grabbed that MGC at 23.60. Still holding. We got a nice little gain there, so we'll see what the ECB does tomorrow. And then I decided for a little swing trade, short-term flip here on MNQ. I shorted the NASDAQ after the high. I mean, literally, I waited till the last 15 minutes of the day. I didn't get caught up in it too early. I shorted at 19.038. And going to plan on riding this. Someone asked why I did it, and I just really think we might get a blow-off top or a little bit of weirdness until the ECB tomorrow, and then depending on what they do and the reaction, I think everything will resume. But there's been a lot of these major pops give back some of it, so playing in between there, definitely speculating, but trying to control it by being a lot smaller, rather than going with a giant NQ or more bigger size with the micros. So that was the second one, and then I closed a couple more plays. Go to yesterday's watch list. I explained these plays too. They're very, very small. Like even then, I don't know if you guys need me to show you this, but like this is something, where is it? But like I was saying, man, I mean, I got like, even then, without, these plays are tiny. Like even the ones I closed today, I don't need the cash right now, but I want it. That's what I'm trying to explain. I'm like, listen, man, oh, you guys didn't see, what was that? That was my Schwab, bro. Oh, but yeah, like I was saying here, I have the cash. It's not like, even I'm still holding Baidu and a couple of other big ones, but it's not like I am in a margin scenario where I'm like, oh my gosh, if I don't have this cash right now, I can't hold these plays and I'll have to do this. No, it's like I want to have this cash, because at this moment, I do think it could be a better risk to reward to chill a little bit until I get another bigger macro shift, and then I want to be ready, and I don't want to have other exposure and go through all of that. And then worst case, if I miss anything, I get my 5% cash in my long term. And honestly, that's sometimes not as bad, especially if we're going to deal with this next 3 months of summer and slow and all of that. So hopefully that makes sense, but close out a couple more plays for losses. Still got a few more I'm going to be working with over the next coming weeks. Maybe I'll keep a couple more. Maybe I'll sell a couple more. But like I'm saying, I'm trying to share with you my idea of why I want the cash and kind of preparing for the unknown, but trying to put myself in a place where I could win no matter what. So hopefully that helps. But that was all that I did today. And then finally, the question of the day. I love this question, actually. I got to pull it down here a little bit, but they said, Josh, what stock did you sell that you regret the most? And I think some of you liked my answer, because it's true. None. I don't really have any stocks that I sold that I regret. My only regrets in this life related to the stock market have been the things that I didn't buy, especially if you've heard me over the years. I mean, think about it. When it's like we're talking about other things, like, did you buy Tesla? No, I didn't. I could regret that at certain times. I bought a Tesla before I bought the stock, and that was 10 years ago. You know what I'm saying? but there's so many things that I didn't buy that I wish I did, even like Ozempic and all of those plays recently, considering how early I was talking about some of it. There are tax plays, recently in the last 2 years, because I did good on one of the like short-term plays. I needed to take some of those tax losses to not be burdened. I had some old plays that I was writing. They were trade plays, but I held them for a decent amount of time. I took tax losses on them, and then they rocketed back up, and they would have came back up. But like literally, this is exactly why I have separation between church and state. If you don't know what I'm saying, I separate the long term from the short term. Yeah, my trades are going to be one thing. Even then, like somebody asked yesterday with Roblo, I made that video about it. I posted long term. I never added it to the long term. I said, hey, here's what I'm feeling. I wanted to go big on it at the time, and I used my trading account money, and I used the stuff that we had in there. And then if I ever really wanted it, I added it to the long term. But then by that time, if that stock came down and there was other better deals, I usually went with the better deals. So the long term, act as if you can't change your mind for 10 years. Separate your long term from your short term. And literally, when it's all said and done, you will want more money in your long term than your trading account. Hopefully, your trading account gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And same thing with your long term. But this is why I've been like that. But this logic, man, I have never really regretted selling anything. I have losses. I've had plays that have gone to zero, or like they're practically zero and they just suck to look at. But I've also had plays that have gone thousands of %, even in our long terms that I've showed you for YouTube. I think we've had like a couple of multi-100 percenters already. And it's like, that is what I like. And literally, this question was brought up because of NVDA. And like, think about it. NVDA, some of you got it when I got Meta, and I was talking about it today, how I wish I bought it and I was getting kind of cheap after buying a lot of other things. But some of you guys did, and a lot of you that did, I told you guys I would just ride that out. Follow the same rules. And literally every $200 that stock went up, every smart guy around the world said why you should sell it, why you should do this, why you shouldn't do that, and get out. Oh, it's not going to be the PE, the valuate, all these things. And do I think they're wrong? No, but like, dude, you're in the long term. You made this decision for 10 years, and then you're telling me you made a great position. You're in a stock that's one of these life changers. Why would you sell rather than let your portfolio grow with it? And then you don't have to buy anything of that nature and can now stack up dividends and other things. Or here's the thing, because I think some people, when I say that, they think I'm like trying to tell you be a bag holder and never use this money. No, I'm asking you to think a little harder, actually, believe it or not. I'm asking you to take that money and really think about what you want to do with it, because otherwise you want to sell out of a stock that you got a good position on that's in the long term in this, then you better have a better investment that's not a stock. Have somewhere to put this money and say, yo, this is why I want to sell out. Not because it's just too high, not because of this, because of that, because I'm scared because I had a stock go up and then it went down before. What? Think about it. You should have another investment. That's what I'm telling you to do, is plan. And in the meantime, unless you could come up with a better plan, let that money work for you, especially the longer you hold it, the less riskier it becomes. You make your money on the buy, all of that good stuff. So, yeah, I don't regret selling anything. Again, a couple of tax plays here and there, but some of them I still got in the long term if they were there. Otherwise, the long term and the plays that I didn't sell and that did very well, there's a reason why I don't have this regret, and I really hope all of you get this and the long term and have a very, very fruitful future, because you are linked to the market from now until you want to buy a house, do anything, or until we die. You know what I'm saying? So I hope that helps. Very, very great question, though. And for real, man, long term, power to the long term. And do not forget about it, man. It'll take you a very, very long way. But that being said, now to the economic lesson. We are going to be talking about the sector model. I thought I gave you this. We did mention it at other points within the book. This will come up again, but if there's anything, the two things I want to say, number one, like I told you guys yesterday, bro, we are like 80 pages into this book, and this just goes to show how you can accomplish so many things just little by little, day by day. But that's the first thing. The second thing, all right, lady. Oh, wow, okay. But the second thing is, if you go to this channel, somebody already asked me about, yo, can you put these in a playlist? They're already there. Go to Econ Lessons 2024. Just go to my channel, The Trading Fraternity, and go through it. And literally, they're all updated. There should have been two more. How come the other one's not here? But I did add the other ones, and you should be able to get them. So hopefully that helps. But now let us get into the lesson. Sector incomes and industry conflict. The sector model argues that trade politics are driven by competition between industries. Industries have distinct preferences because trade's incomes affects divide society along industry lines. Whenever tariffs are raised or lowered, wages and the return to capital employed in some industries both rise, whereas wages and return to capital employed in other industries both fall. Trade therefore pits the workers and capitalists employed in one industry against the workers and capitalists employed in another industry in the conflict over distribution of national income. The sector model argues that trade divides society across industry rather than factor lines because the assumption it makes about factor mobility are different from the assumptions embodied in the factor model. Factor mobility refers to the ease with which labor and capital can move from one industry to another. The factor model assumes that factors are highly mobile. Labor and capital can easily move from one industry to another. Thus, capital currently employed in the apparel industry can quickly be shifted to the computer industry. Similarly, workers currently engaged in apparel production can easily shift to computer production. When factors are mobile, people's economic interests are determined by their factor ownership. Workers care about what happens to labor, whereas capitalists care about their return on capital. The sector model assumes that factors are not easily moved from one industry to another. Instead, factors are tied or specific to the sector in which they are currently employed. Capital currently employed in apparel production cannot easily move to the computer industry. What use does a loom or a spinning machine have in the computer industry? Workers also have industry-specific skills that do not transfer easily from one sector to another. A worker who spent 15 years maintaining sophisticated automated looms and spinning machines in an apparel plant cannot easily transfer those skills to computer production. In addition, the geography of industry location often means that quitting a job in one industry to take a job in another requires workers to physically relocate. Shifting from apparel production to automobile production might require a worker to shift from North Carolina to Michigan. Logistical obstacles to physical relocation can be insurmountable. A worker may not be able to sell his house because the decline of the local industry has contributed to more general economic decline in his community. Complex social and psychological factors also intervene, as it's difficult to abandon the network of social relations that one has developed over many years. The combination of specific skills, logistical problems, and attachments to established community mean that the labor cannot always move from one industry to another. When factors are immobile, trade affects the incomes of all factors employed in a given industry. In the same way, we could see why, by returning to our U.S.-China example, consider the apparel industry first. Shirt imports from China lead to less shirt production in the U.S. Factories are closed and workers are laid off. As in the factor model, apparel workers see their incomes fall. In contrast to the factor model, however, the owners of capital employed in apparel production also see their incomes fall. Why? Because capital is immobile, and therefore capital employed in the apparel production cannot move into the computer industry. I gotta make sure you guys see this. When I was editing, I was like, I don't know if you get you get this left side. As demand for American shirts fall, demand for capital employed in the American shirt industry must also fall. As it does, the return to capital must also fall. Workers and business owners in the apparel sector thus both suffer from trade. The opposite consequences are evident in the computer industry. Trade's impact on the return to capital employed in the computer industry is similar to the factor model. As computer production expands, increasing demand for capital raises the return to capital employed in the computer industry. Trade's impact on the incomes worked employed in the computer industry is quite different from the factor model's prediction. The factor model tells us that computer workers see their incomes fall as they compete against workers released by apparel industry. With more people chasing fewer jobs, all workers' incomes fall. The sector model argues that the computer workers' incomes rise because labor is immobile. The workers released by the apparel industry cannot move into the computer industry. Greater demand for labor and computer increases wages paid to workers already employed in the industry. Thus, capital and labor employed in the American computer industry industry both gain from trade. When factors are immobile, it makes little sense to speak of the interests of a unified labor or capitalist class. The apparel worker loses from trade. The computer worker gains. Roger Milliken, owner of the world's largest privately owned textile firm, Milliken & Company, loses from trade with Michael Dell, founder of Dell Computers, gains. Consequently, trade policy interests are defined in terms of the industry in which people work or have invested their capital. Apparel workers and Roger Milliken will have a common interest in trade policy. Computer workers and Michael Dell will have a common interest in trade policy. Trade politics is then driven by competition between the workers and the capitalists who gain from trade and the workers and capitalists who lose. The result is not class conflict, but conflict between industries. We can be very precise about which industries gain and which lose from trade. Labor and capital employed in industries that rely intensively on society's abundant factors, the country's comparatively advantaged industries, both gain from trade. In the advanced industrialized countries, this means that labor and capital employed in capital-intensive and high-tech industries such as computers, pharma, biotech, all gain from trade. As a group, these industries are referred to as the export-oriented sector. Don't forget this. This is going to come up. Conversely, labor and capital employed in the industries that rely intensely on society's scarce factor, the country's comparatively disadvantaged industries, lose from trade. In the advanced industrialized countries, that means the incomes of owners of capital and workers employed in labor-intensive, such as apparel, footwear, will fall as a result of trade. As a group, these industries are commonly referred to as import-competing sectors. Remember that one. Thus, the sector model argues that trade politics is driven by competition between the import-competing and export-oriented sectors. The sector model adds nuance to our understanding of the political debate over globalization. The factor model suggests that the debate over globalization pits labor against capital, and the sector model suggests that this political debate often pits capital and labor in import-competing industries against capital and labor in export-oriented industries. We might expect, therefore, that the Union of Needle Trades, Industrial, and Textile Employers, the principal union in the American apparel industry, and the American Textile Manufacturers, ATMI, a business association representing American textile firms, would both oppose globalization. Indeed, that's what we find. Unite has been a vocal opponent of NAFTA, the FTAA, and a fast-track authority. For its most part, the ATMI has not been critical of all trade agreements, but it has opposed free trade agreements with South Korea and Singapore, has been very critical of American decision to grant China permanent normal trade status, and does not support further opening of the U.S. market to foreign textiles through multilateral trade negotiations. In general, labor and capital employed in textile and apparel are both skeptical of globalization. Conversely, the sector model predicts that the capital and labor employed in export-oriented industries will both support globalization. It is relatively easy to document such support among American export-oriented firms. A coalition of business electronics representing America's high-tech firms, including Consumer Electronics Association, Electronic Industry Alliance, Information Tech Industry Council, Multimedia Telecommunications Association, and the Semiconductor Industry Association, has supported fast-track authority, approval of normal trade relations with China, NAFTA, and the FTAA. It is more difficult to document attitudes of workers employed in these industries, in large part because workers in high-tech sectors are not unionized to the same extent as workers in manufacturing industries. However, workers in high-tech industries are predominantly high-skilled, and on average, high-skilled workers are more supportive of trade liberalization than low-skilled workers. Again, he has to source it so you don't cancel him. Although this is indirect evidence, it is consistent with the prediction that both labor and capital employed in American high-tech industries will support globalization. The factor and sector model suggests, both models thus both argue that trade policy preferences are determined by the income consequences of trade. Trade raises the incomes of some groups and lowers the incomes of others. Those who gain from trade prefer trade liberalization, where those who lose prefer protectionism. Each model offers a distinct pattern of trade policy preferences. However, based on distinct conceptions of how the income affects trade divides society, Consequently, the factor model states that trade divides society across factor lines, and that consequently trade politics is driven by conflict between labor and capital. The sector model states that trade divides society along sector lines, and that consequently trade politics is driven by conflict between import competing and export oriented industries. These distinct patterns are based on the assumptions each models make about factor mobility. The factor model assumes that factors are highly mobile, and therefore people define the interest in terms of factor ownership. The sector model suggests that factors are immobile, and thus people define their interest in terms of industry in which they're earning a living. So we'll finish it off here, but hopefully you guys are getting it. The last one we went, the factor model, it explained, when an industry goes here and there, what happens to incomes. But if you don't, I don't know, this goes back to the schools of thought. Factor model boils it down to classes. It's saying capital and labor. If this benefits labor, then capital loses. If capital benefits, labor loses, and that's it. And then again, factor mobility, that's just saying if you believe that there truly is computers and shirts can easily swap out factories and workers, then yeah, it works. But you'll see here the sector model is more emphasized on trade. And like I'm saying, export-oriented, import-oriented, these are going to come up with understanding a lot of the other models and to just understand, basic trade and the industries that, again, comparatively advantaged or comparatively disadvantaged. That will say a lot, and you could draw a lot from those assumptions. So moving forward, recent research evaluates empirically the assumption that trade policy preferences reflect narrowly defined economic self-interest. There's a lot of sources. Much of this work finds that rather than base trade policy preferences on their factor ownership or on the sector in which they are employed, people more typically base their trade policy preferences on perception of what is good for the country as a whole. Such sociotropic concerns might focus on or revolve around attitudes towards outgroups, i.e. foreigners, foreign policy, isolationism or interventionism, or beliefs that the impact of trade on the national economy rather than specific sectors. Consequently, people might hold complicated trade policy preferences that change over time. For instance, a person might support trade during economic booms but oppose trade during recessions. If citizens believe that trade enriches their country as a whole, they will be more likely to support open trade. Conversely, if citizens believe that trade causes a loss of jobs to other countries, they will be more likely to oppose open trade policies. What conclusions should we draw from research about the utility of continuing to rely on two standard economic models of trade policy? Some scholars argue that the inability to find unambiguous evidence that individuals' trade policy preferences reflect material self-interest constitutes a fundamental challenge to the open economy politics perspective. Others suggest that the field should rely less on the assumption that preferences reflect objective reality and focus more on the importance of individual beliefs as models that mediate between the objective material world and individual preferences. A recent review suggests that we need to look at individual preferences in a broader context. Economic hardship alone is often not sufficient or even necessary for public support for protectionism to emerge. Even when blame is clearly attributed to globalization, income shocks are filtered through partisan competition, ideological battles over who deserves protection more than others, and existing or lack thereof welfare programs, and these factors produce a variety of backlash responses across time and space. So you better understand factor model, better understand sector model, but if you haven't realized, just like every chapter, he ends it by saying, well, yeah, there's a lot of different things, and then these models have their flaws. And nowadays, even now, is saying that, well, it's really just like a weird mix of preferences nowadays, and people shift between the objective real world and then other individual preferences, regardless of what industry, sector, or factor that they are aligned with. Wow, look at that. Pachatadonia. That is your watch list, ladies and gentlemen. Make sure Hydrate Healthy ready to go. Make sure post your watch list. Make sure we see you there in the morning. I need the armor on. I need the helmet shining. And I need you to remember, you could always be wrong, but that's okay. You don't need to be a know-it-all teenager. You know what I'm saying? There's levels, baby. Time to grow. Pachatadonia, I love you. Drink that water. Stay hydrated, healthy, all that good stuff. I'll see you in the morning and on.